Combat takes up a great deal of time at our D&D tables, so it helps if it's awesome. Here are 5 tips drawn from thousands of combats run over the last 28 years as a professional and hobbyist DM to help you improve your combats. And 1 bonus tip to help you improve every combat you ever run after it's already over. It's fairly common that we run combat as a fairly binary affair. It's very win or lose, pass or fail, live or die, which makes a ton of sense. The idea of combat is, of course, to raise the stakes and to have something exciting that is answering the question of, can the players defeat this thing or do they die? But the problem with running combat, where the only question that we're trying to answer is, do they die, is that it's very one note and it doesn't create that epic feel that we're really looking for. The first and perhaps most important way to improve your combats is to find a way to have more questions that you need to answer. This means giving your players more than one goal, more than one objective, and more than one success or fail condition. This can look like adding a ritual to stop a time limit of any sort, a ticking bomb that's going to explode. It can mean adding a person that needs to be protected or guided or captured to the encounter. It can even be a moral quandary where your adventurers aren't sure if the creatures that they're fighting are really who they should be fighting. Essentially, anything that you can add to your encounter that's going to split the focus away from the question of live or die and onto other questions of success or failure is going to elevate your encounter from the mundane to the epic. Additionally, epic encounters tend to have multiple parts mechanically as well, and those parts work together either mechanically, narratively, or both. And that's because creating synergy between the different pieces of your puzzle that puts together the encounter is something that is so important to creating an epic feeling. As a simple example, if you're using an ancient red dragon as your foe, it might seem silly to include a whole bunch of kobolds as their allies. Mechanically speaking, they don't really fit the mold in terms of being something that's going to threaten the adventurers that are at a high enough level to be able to face the dragon, but narratively they fit the focus of being these tiny little things that are slavishly devoted to their god dragon. But adding those minions to the encounter elevates it from the normal to the epic by allowing the dragon to show how little it cares for its little minions, incinerating them in its breath weapon and providing this backdrop of swarming endless waves of annoying little kobolds that need to be worked around and basically put up with in order to fight the ancient dragon that they're actually there to battle. Meanwhile, on the mechanical front, the easiest way to describe what mechanical synergy looks like is actually to refer to 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, which did a great job of classifying different monsters as fitting into different categories of battle. You had skirmishers and artillery that provided support at either a distance or by darting in and out of the fray, and you had brutes and soldiers that fought up close and either held people in place or just provided large amounts of damage while soaking it up with their own hit points. These archetypes still exist in 5th edition, but you have to look a little bit closer to be able to find them, and mixing and matching them together in order to find a synergy that works best for the encounter that you have in mind is a little bit of an art. Essentially, if you're using, say, for instance, a spellcaster that has massive damage potential and a lot of utility, but is very fragile, then you should be looking from a synergistic standpoint for a creature that can keep your party at bay from them so that the spellcaster can do its work. But of course, it doesn't really matter how synergistic your mechanics are if your encounter doesn't happen in the right place, because the best encounters happen in the best terrain. When you're planning for an epic encounter, you should be looking at the terrain and thinking to yourself what kind of challenges and options it gives to your players and to your monsters. No matter where your encounter is happening, there's always opportunities to make the terrain a little bit more interesting by adding a feature that can be interacted with in the midst of combat. Elevation points that provide challenges for your players in order to be able to get from the ground level up to where the fight is going to be coming from is an excellent example. Not only do these provide provide that difficulty of figuring out how you're going to get from here to there, but they also provide some sense of cover to the creatures that are up there. They give opportunities for creatures to be pulled or pushed off of that ledge down into the damage below, and they add scale and depth to your battlefield, elevating the mental impression of your epic encounter also. So when you're picturing and designing the terrain for your epic encounter, make sure that you're trying to figure out what it is, first and foremost, that your terrain is going to provide a challenge for, and what options it makes available. Your focus should generally be upon what challenge you can provide to the players, or what obstacles need to be overcome by the players, because usually our encounters are happening on the defensive as the players rush into the homes of our monsters, and the monsters aren't necessarily the ones that are needing to overcome things. They should be the ones getting that advantage. But that's not always the case, so of course stick with your story. Of course, because pacing is the most important skill to master in D&D, knowing how to accelerate that pace in combat is vital. And it happens by learning how to add developments to your encounters that change the situation or the expectations of the battle. This ties right back into the first point about having multiple success conditions and multiple questions that are being answered. Just because we're trying to create an encounter that has these many layers and these multiple options for your players to engage with doesn't mean that you need to give all of those options in a flood right up front. By leaning into the questions that you're trying to create the encounter and then adding them in at strategic points during your fight, you can continue to switch and change the expectations of your players and increase the tension at the table. This makes any encounter more tense and more exciting, and is as simple as keeping the most important monster in the next room beyond where your players start the engagement so that it can rush in on its initiative and suddenly create more fear and tension. But it can also work on a micro level by, in your narration as you're setting up a player to take their turn, including a snippet that talks about what a monster that's upcoming is going to do next. By including a little bit of talk about what the monsters are going to be doing, you're still answering the question of can we defeat the monster, but you add the question of can I stop the monster from doing this thing? If you're always looking to what the monster is going to be doing next in order to succeed at the encounter, then add questions and make changes in the middle of the encounter to make it more epic. But nothing ruins an epic encounter quite like having it drag on into a slog of draining those final few hit points after the questions have been answered. Finding ways to create a sudden ending to an encounter is a huge skill for elevating your encounters from boring to epic. It can be as simple as having things break morale and flee, and then narrating their horrible deaths if your party chooses to chase them. Explosions of energy and death throes are always kind of fun too, if you want to end with a bang. But no matter how cool your encounter was or wasn't, there is one way that you can make it more awesome after the fact, and that's to get your players talking about it. Finding ways to narratively bring up the encounter at later points after the battle has been over, and allowing people to talk about their favorite moments or the best things that they did in the encounter cements that encounter into the minds of our players and helps them to recall those fun moments. This can be as simple as having an NPC bard at the tavern ask them for the story of their adventure so that they can share it with other towns far and wide and spread the fame of the group. And what group could turn that down? But taking a few moments of game time to allow the players to tell that story is a great way to cement an epic encounter and elevate it to the truly mythic levels. You'll find that those stories that your players have the opportunity to brag about in character and to recall those cool moments are also the stories that make their way around the snack table for years to come. What was your most epic encounter? What made it so awesome? I'd love to hear about it in the comments and to add it to my list. And if you're serious about improving your encounters, I've got a handy checklist you can follow with a host of suggestions on how to implement today's tips. You can get it by supporting the channel here or on Patreon or by following this link. Thanks for watching and happy adventuring.